Hello and welcome to Thursdays on the Stoop. Today we have Body Snatchers with Avitus B. Carle. Avitus lives and writes outside of Philadelphia. Her stories have been published in a variety of places, including Fractured Lit, X-Ray Magazine, JMWW, SoFloPoJo,
Mhm.
a word I can definitely say, Necessary Fiction, The Commuter with Electric Lit, and elsewhere. Um, Avitus's stories have been included in the Best Small Fictions anthology, Best of the Net, and Wigleaf Top 50. Her debut flash fiction collection, These Worn Bodies, is published by Moon City Press. She can be found online at avitusbcarl.com or online everywhere at avitusbcarl. Thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Yes, thank you, Julian, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming to my session today, which is, all right, Body Snatchers. And we're going to be talking about flash fiction today. We're also going to be writing some flash fiction today, and feel free to not limit yourselves to just flash fiction. I may be talking about flash when I'm talking about body snatchers in stories and in writing, but feel free to either write micros, feel free to turn them into short stories, even memoir, novels, wherever the mood takes you. All right, Julian introduced me, but I thought I'd review again. Who is she? She is me. My name is Avitus B. Carle, writer of weird, experimental, oftentimes form-bending flash fiction, nonfiction, and short stories. I am the former editor of Flashback Fiction and also Fractured Lit, so I will also be speaking to what I would have loved to see in the queue as while I was working with those two literary magazines, and also stories that I oftentimes didn't see in the queue and why. As you heard, my debut flash fiction collection, These Worn Bodies, was the 2023 Moon City Press Short Fiction Prize winner and is now available through the University of Arkansas Press website, which is uapress.com, and also on Bookshop. So the course overview, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is flash fiction, which might be a review for some of you. I know a lot of people are still unfamiliar with the form and the difference between a flash fiction piece, a micro, and a prose poem. And then the so what of it all, like I said, I was an editor for Flashback Fiction and also Fractured Lit. So why discuss body snatchers in Flash at all? What's the point? Why might this be an avenue you want to write about when exploring writing? And then I'm going to give you some examples and prompts, and then final thoughts and questions. And note, I do have slides that literally say questions on them. One, to give me a break from talking, but also if you have any questions about the material. But we do have an hour, so I might have to cut you all short so we can get all the material and have enough time to write and respond to the prompts. Okay, so first, defining flash fiction. A work of flash is a story between 401 and 1,000 words in length, and that's not to be confused with vignettes or an excerpt from a short story or a novel. So a lot of the times in the submission queue, we would get vignettes or excerpts, and that is not what flash fiction or a micro is. A flash must contain a beginning, middle, and end, as well as moments of tension. And most importantly, at least in my opinion, a flash fiction piece must establish a shift, and that is either experienced by one or multiple characters and is something that impacts the overall setting of the piece or within the events that have taken place. So, one of my favorite examples in Flash would be the apocalypse story. And oftentimes in Flash, we don't have time to explore how the apocalypse happened. In Flash, we talk about what the story is during the apocalypse. So, what is the one moment during the apocalypse that we want to focus on? I've published a piece from the point of view of a zombie, and the point is not that the apocalypse has happened. The point is that this zombie is self aware and she is trying to communicate with humans. And that moment is the story where she meets humans and tries to talk to them. And it all just unravels from there. So, also, when I talk about establishing the shift in flash fiction, I'm talking about that moment of change, the moment where either the characters can never go back to how things happened how they were in the beginning of the story, or how a character decides to remain the same. So a character doesn't always have to change, but if they decide to remain the same, then how do their circumstances change with their decision? They might decide, I'm going to stay in this marriage despite being miserable. How then does their spouse react to them staying despite being miserable? Do they just live miserably ever after? Does the spouse say, no, I don't want you to be miserable. I think we should break up? What are the consequences once that shift occurs? And this is also our alert to readers to the fact that something has forever changed and the consequences that might occur should everything remain the same. And this shift is what is the difference between a flash and micro and a prose poem. I also want to take a moment to note I will be sending the slides to everyone after this. So if you want to like rest your hand for the prompts, no problem. These slides will be available to you once the course is over. So one of my favorite quotes is Flash is the art of the glance, not the gaze. And what I often tell my students is that when we're writing flash fiction versus prose poetry is looking at the story through a window. We can't hear what the characters are saying. We're more observing what's happening on the page versus flash and micro is us entering the story. We are in the moment with those characters. We can hear everything they're saying. We're experiencing everything they feel and what they're doing. So that's how I like to establish the difference between those two. And just a quick note on the micro. A micro is a story anywhere between 1 and 400 words and contains the same elements of Flash, but just in a much more compact form. And also note, different literary magazines and journals have varying definitions regarding the length requirements of micro and flash stories that they publish. So one literary magazine may say their max for flash fiction is 1,500 words. You have 100-word story, which only publishes stories that are 100 words in length, no more and no less. And these don't include titles at all. These are just like the story itself. So your title can be as long as it wants to be, and then the word count starts when the story starts. And that's why it's always important to read the guidelines. So are there any questions? All right, I'm not seeing anyone unless it's in the chat, which I cannot see. Julian, are there any questions in the chat?
Not currently.
Okay. Woo, we can keep going. Awesome. So what? Why write about a character's transformation, about misplaced, discarded, and locked away limbs and internal organs? Why even touch this subject? And I found that a lot of times in the queue when I was an editor, I wanted a new way of depicting the inevitable shift in a story and the moment of no return for the characters. A lot of the times, I know we've all read a breakup story. We've all read the love story. We've all read the parent story. There are stories that we've read over and over again, and there are stories that sometimes we're afraid to write because we've seen them so many times. So now we're constantly trying to find different ways of how to enter the story, and this is one of the ways. So I don't know if anyone out there is as obsessed as I am about this new K-drama called Heavenly Ever After. And I thought this was a perfect example of how the body is transformed. So in this K-drama, it's about a woman who passes away, and in heaven, you're allowed to choose how you look. And not to give any spoilers, the woman chooses to look one way and she meets people who have chosen to either be their younger selves, or in this case, as you see on the screen, we have this little girl that she's talking to, and we find out that the little girl is actually the old woman. And in the drama series, you find out that she has come back as a little girl in order to fulfill the wish of her daughter-in-law who passed away before she could have any children. And the daughter-in-law's last wish was that her mother-in-law find her in heaven and be the child that she's always wanted. So see how we have this reunion story, but told with a different bent, how the body has transformed to fulfill a purpose. We could also use another example of a man who dresses himself or dresses half himself as a woman in order to talk to the alleged perfect woman of his dreams, but only when he sees that half of himself reflected. So we see we have a character that's in control of their appearance, but also in control of how he talks to someone. He being half of the woman that he thinks is the woman of his dreams. But then we can create the shift in the story in that this man finds out that his other half, which is still attached to him, does not want him as the man that he is, even though he's created technically the woman of his dreams. The woman of his dreams does not think he is the man of her dreams. So see how we add complications to the story and how we can slowly either explore the body or unravel the situations that we've come up with. We've also created a new way to create the relationship story and the breakup story. Questions about that? Okay. So our first story is entitled "A Lobster" by Rachel Rear. It was published in Smoke Long Quarterly. And going to stop sharing for a moment to post that in the chat for you. Oh, that didn't post at all. There we go. I think that posted. Hold on. All right, there we go. Posted it in the chat in case you want to read along. So we have the lobster. My father creeps down the hall in his lobster costume, big red tail sissing as it drags across the carpet. It's been this way since my mother left 2 Junes ago, piling her things into the back of a cab, headed for Hollywood or Vegas, somewhere bright and impatient. I never did get to do the exciting things, she said, tying a pink kerchief around her crepe skinned neck. She squeezed me to her chest like I was sending her off, blew a thespian kiss to my father, a cruise ship sayonara. We stood in the yard after the taillights disappeared, thinking maybe she didn't mean this, thinking how could we go inside, how could we make this real? My father tucked himself away behind the locked door of their bedroom for a week, and I left plates of food that only attracted ants. I was in the kitchen early the morning he came through the door carrying the monstrous plush lobster suit like a child from a burning building. He smelled of a dumpster and spilled scotch. Look here, tossed on the side of I-90. What a treasure, yes? He said, eyes blitzing, and it was the first time I'd seen his face for a cold week, so yes, I said, a treasure. He hoisted the suit in both arms and disappeared, and I imagined my mother as a tiny canary, black velvet hiding her from a world of light. Soon he started wearing the suit for every meal. He'd scoop forkfuls of shepherd's pie through the little breathing hole, spoons of butterscotch pudding. Then it was while he watched soaps in the afternoons. Then it was always. I came into the living room one evening, a home video muted on the TV, every curtain drawn, my father rocking his knees to his chest. On the screen, my mother had her back to the camera and she was swinging my 3-year-old body in her arms, dipping me like a tea kettle as I laughed. She put me down and I toppled past the camera, out of view. Inside his lobster shell, my father leaned toward the screen and grandiose shadow cast on every wall. We both waited for my mother to turn around, waited and waited until the video cut to a recording of the Macy's Day Parade. Her belongings started to go missing. I bought pistachios and her hummingbird nutcracker was nowhere to be found. Then her Sonny and Cher memorabilia plate was gone from the kitchen wall, her knitting needles pulled from a ball of powder pink yarn. When I grew too curious, I crept into his room while he napped on the couch, half expecting a shrine of her things or a mound to curl up against. But nothing. Even her jewelry box was wiped clean. That night, I made his favorite brand of frozen lasagna and planned to ask about the disappearances. When my father got up from the table to wipe lasagna off his claw, a pearl earring dropped from the nostril of the crustaceous getup. "Mom's?" I asked. He bent to pinch it up and looked at me from somewhere inside that dark hole before he tottered toward the hall. Tonight, I listened to him lug past my bedroom door. It's late, but I hear him turn the coffee pot on. Too many times he dumped scalding coffee through the breathing hole and down the inside of his shell before he started using a turkey baster to suck it from the pot and squeeze it into his mouth. In the living room, a pincer clicks the record player on, moving the arm into place on my mother's favorite violin concerto. This is new. I move to the doorway, and in the flicker of a dying bulb, I see my father waltzing, claws raised, holding the air in the shape of my mother, pulling her close, dipping and twirling and spinning together on the wool rug. "Dad." I step into the light, and he turns. The black hole where his face must be reaches straight through me. "Isn't it time?" I ask. His claws are still raised. I cross the room, and when we're face to face, I reach for him, lifting the suit up and over his head. Coffee dribbles have dried on his chin, and he stares at me through teary eyes, worlds and worlds away. I slide the suit down over my own body. Inside a galaxy of my mother, glittering bracelets, balls of yarn that smell of her perfume, nail clippers with crescent clippings still between the teeth, a wad of hair woven into her comb, a toothpick smudged with lipstick, the nutcracker. My mother dangles and dances on the walls of this shell home, nestled into the structure's frame, whispering into my ear as the concerto rolls. I see my father's face through the hole in the suit. He wraps his arms around me, and we sway and sway. Okay, so in The Lobster, we see in the beginning we are presented with two characters in the midst of change. So we're immediately thrown into this breakup where we see the father dressed as a lobster and the daughter witnessing her father dressed as the lobster. So we have the absurd with the realistic, the father coping with his grief, dressing up as this character, and the daughter being forced to come face to face with the coping mechanisms of her father. But I want you to also notice how the father's external transformation also leads to the daughter's internal change. So when a breakup happens, normally it affects two people. With families, it affects more than one person. And in this story, it's affecting the father in that he's withdrawing, and that makes the daughter a more active character. She has to cook the meals, and the daughter is also the one that now has to keep an eye on her father. And that's where we really get to see the daughter play the active role. We see her catching her father, watching home videos of the mother. And then also, she kind of trails after him throughout the story. So she is her own character, but everything she does, every action she has, is impacted by the father who she's constantly chasing after. So what is the shift in the story? What is the point of no return? We have what happens, what occurs that leads to it, which is the mother leaves, and then the father finds the lobster suit. And both of these factors lead to the inevitable hoarding of the mother's items going missing. The daughter notices that her mother's items are disappearing, and that's when the shift occurs, that we see something has inevitably changed. Not only has her mother gone, but also every single reminder of her mother in the house is starting to disappear. There's also the emotional impact of what's happening. The daughter is noticing, oh, my father is really not okay. Not only is he in this lobster costume, but now he's starting to grab hold of all of my mother's things and keep them for himself. And then finally, we get the ending in which the daughter fully immerses herself in the absurdity of grief. And also, we see the father switch places. He has to take off the head, or she takes off the head for him and places it on her head. And he has to see his daughter become part of this lobster, this thing that he has created, but also being immersed in all of the things that he's collected. So you see at the end, we have the exchange of the daughter becoming part of the absurd and the father slowly coming back to reality. There's also an interview that Rachel did. I won't read this passage because I want to get to the prompt, but she discusses what inspired her to explore this. And I thought this section was really interesting in that she talks about how grief manifests itself through strange and grotesque. And this is something I don't see a lot in the queue, in that we don't often explore the more absurd ways we cope with grief. We tend to really focus on how we ground ourselves in our grief. So sometimes we isolate, and sometimes we just have to break down and cry. A lot of times we'll go talk about it with someone that we trust, but we don't try to explore the more absurd ways of coping with grief. And that's what really drew her to create this story. Like I said, finding a new avenue to talk about something that we often see within stories. Questions about the lobster or anything that I've discussed so far? All right. So our first prompt, something's wrong. I want you to have something wrong or something happen to your character. Give them a really strong emotion. So whether that's anger or sadness, or they feel distant from something, or maybe they're just happy, but now is really not the time or place for this emotion. And instead of stating the emotion, have your character don a costume that expresses the emotion instead, like we see in Lobster. So this costume could be obvious, like a bundle of balloons that are brightly colored to express happiness. Or you might have Freddy Krueger, which represents anger. Or the costume could be something more discreet, like a rock. Or I don't know if y'all remember Clippy that used to help you out in Word. He would pop up, annoyingly so, and just be willing to, like, can I answer your question today? You could have Clippy appear, or you could have a strawberry be the costume of choice. And then I want you to place your character in a setting that is the complete opposite of this emotion dressed in the costume. So you could have the happy bundle of balloons at a funeral procession. You could have Freddy Krueger on the subway or at a children's birthday party. You could have The Rock at a baby shower or trying to do the polar plunge. And then I want you also to consider, how do outsiders interact with your character? Or how does your character dressed in the costume and feeling their emotions interact with the world around them? Pay attention to the language and details in your drafts. Costumes malfunction all the time. A rock in a polar plunge is a terrible thing. Also, costumes run hot. They don't smell good all the time. They're complicated to put on, they're complicated to take off. And then think of this new body your character is embodying, how it moves, how it hinders them, how it interacts with the situation they find themselves in. And I know we have a limited amount of time, so it might be easier to enter it like Rachel did with the lobster, and have the main character be the observer instead of the one that's wearing the costume, the one living in reality, witnessing the absurd. So let's take 8 minutes for this one. 1 minute left. All right, finish up your last sentence, your story. And I was looking through the comments and I'm so thankful someone got the Clippy reference. I never know who's going to get what I'm talking about. It was either between Clippy or Ask Jeeves. So I'm so happy Clippy worked out. All right. So next we're going to talk about moving parts. We talked about the absurd and the body in a costume, but what if we're just talking about body parts and how they move throughout these worlds that we're creating? And as writers, we have this ability to lean more into the absurd, but tend to avoid it. And I ask why. And it's because of believability. A lot of writers get into their heads, which all of us do at one point, but a lot of writers tend to avoid the absurd and writing the absurd because we fear that readers won't be grounded in the work, grounded in the story. And yet we write stories about zombies all the time. We write about creatures that can move around and eat brains. And we have stories that have fairies, and we have stories that take place in the apocalypse. And then also we have characters like Miss Piggy and BoJack Horseman. So why not write about the body in this absurd way? Why couldn't I have, in which I did, I have a story about a father who cuts off his hand and gifts it to his daughter before walking out of her life. And that story is in Taco Bell Quarterly, if y'all are interested. But I wanted to note that a writer's goal is to entice readers to read their stories, but their greatest obstacle is oftentimes getting out of their own way. So oftentimes we have a brilliant idea for a story, but once we start questioning if people are going to read it, if someone is going to like it, if it's going to get published, if we have the time, then we start to get bogged down in the details, and that's when the story begins to fall apart. So after this workshop, I want you to ask yourself, what could a body part disowned represent on the page? And what about a body misplaced or destroyed or surrendered or forgotten? And this doesn't have to be the whole body. It could be a finger, a toe, the nose, even just a forehead or whatever body part you're thinking about. And then if we as writers give our characters the ability to remove their brains or their lungs or unscrew their leg or unravel their arms, what message are we trying to communicate to our readers? So an example of this, and this is a micro, it's called A Lustrous Interior by Tara Isabel Zambrano. And I will put that in the chat in case you want to read along. Super short story though, so we won't be spending a lot of time with this one, reading it at least. Okay. A Lustrous Interior. My heart falls out on a sidewalk, a thick fluid staining the concrete. I gather the pieces and shove it in my pocket, drops of blood on my inner thighs. At home, I staple it, crisscross it with scotch tape, try to balance it on the kitchen counter, but it cracks open like a pomegranate, a dark constellation of want in the center. I pull it apart with a fork, wash it clean of twigs, dirt, and despair. I wonder what it would say if it had a mouth, if words would fall like seeds and sprout a language I'd hardly understand. So unlike in The Lobster, where the absurd and reality are kept separate, represented by the daughter and then by the father, in this micro, they're combined. We have the heart falling out paired with a character is able to survive without their heart in their body. We have the heart is still pumping blood, as we see when the character inserts it in their pocket, and then their thighs start to stain with blood. And we see that there are multiple attempts to fix the heart and to stitch what has been broken. And then we have the shift that occurs. But it cracks open like a pomegranate, a dark constellation of want in the center. I pull it apart with a fork, wash it clean of twigs and dirt and despair. This heart cannot be fixed, no matter what our narrator or main character does. The heart cannot be prepared. However, the narrator can attempt to understand either what's happened or why it's happening, or may never reach a full understanding of why the heart broke in the first place. And I love how we're left with this more open-ended ending, in that the narrator wants to understand what the heart wants, what it's yearning for, what it needs, what it requires in order to be repaired. And oftentimes we have these stories where nothing can be done in order to save what's been lost. All we can do is try and then figure out what to do next. So questions about that?
Got a question in the chat.
Hi, yes. I had a quick question just about like balancing like absurdity with grounding your reader. I guess like for me, like I was taught that I was wondering what you thought about this because like I was taught that like the first job of a writer is to establish common ground. And I find that like in my own work, I'm very drawn to like more like abstract or quote unquote like poetic kind of themes. And I was wondering like what's a way that you think you can balance covering like familiar and common like human topics like grief or things like that with unfamiliar images, like somebody wearing like a lobster suit or someone's heart falling to the ground.
Yeah, so like we see in Lobster, we are grounded in a moment. We are familiar with a house. We are familiar with being at home, and that is our grounding moment. And then the grief comes through not only with the mother leaving in that explanation, my mother left, and the assumed grief that the readers will just automatically take away, but also the grief of the father isolating himself. It's just the isolation part is presented in the absurd way, instead of in later he locks himself away in the room, but initially he wears the lobster costume, so he's literally hiding away from that grief. So if I was writing the story, I might just present the father's like, oh, he just sits on the couch and that's all he does. And then as I'm going back through and editing, I want to add a different bent on it, or experiment, or add the weird to the story and start exploring methods of hiding away. How do people hide themselves? We wear costumes. We lock ourselves in rooms, but what if the room isn't the bedroom? What if it's the attic? What if he's just locks himself in the window? So we have all these different ways of exploring the different levels of hiding away. And I think that's the way we explore absurdity in our stories, but also ground them in the common setting of this is a house, this is where we live. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? All right. So our next prompt is you dropped something. You dropped an eye, a lung, your tongue, or your stomach. And I want you to think of a body part your character loses, either by accident or on purpose. Does the part break? Does it roll away? decides to just up and quit your character one day. And I also highly encourage you, these stories don't have to be told from the human perspective. You could easily take control and tell it from the eyeball's perspective. Like the eyeball just wanted to hop out of the socket and be like, you know what? You don't go anywhere. You're isolated all the time. I'm going to go see the world. And if I decide to come back, okay. But if not, then I'm going to go find out what's better out there for me. And, or you could decide if someone else picks up this body part. I also encourage you to please avoid the Van Gogh scenario. Oftentimes we get the love story where someone has cut off a body part and just hands it to the lover as an expression of their love. And while this may seem like an interesting turn of events, it's been done before. It's literally marked in history because Van Gogh was the first known or most popular person to do it. However, I encourage you to try giving a lung to a longtime smoker. Add complications to that and make the longtime smoker be a parent who tells the character that they're just not going to quit smoking and how that complicates the sacrifice of a lung. Or have a character remove their eyes because they've seen something they shouldn't have seen or something that greatly impacts them. Is it easier for them to navigate this new world without sight, or is it easier for them to just keep this secret to themselves? This could also be an interesting way to explore the breakup story. Instead of having your character who knows they're about to be broken up with go meet their person in the relationship, have them instead take out their tongue, remove their eyes so they don't have to see the person. If they can't see them, it can't happen. Or maybe they're the person that wants to break up with the other person and they just can't find the right time to do it. And so they make the time. They store away an arm or something to remind them to come back to it later. I want you to also consider how the body parts move and how they feel and how they look when they're no longer attached to the character. Does an eye still see without being attached to the socket? Does a tongue still have taste when no longer in the mouth? And then explore why your character either traded or discarded or wants to replace the body part removed. People get sick. They have body parts that they wish they could replace, but either can't afford to. So what if they could just take off the body part that is causing them grief? Or what methods does your character try to mend or make the body part that they've removed perfect again? So let's take 5 minutes for this prompt. 1 minute left. All right, so I hope these prompts have been helpful and have gotten you to start on stories that explore different ways of entering different topics, especially surrounding the body. I wanted to thank you all for joining me today and talking about the absurd versus the realistic and how we can think about grief, how we can think about anger, happiness, joy, either with transforming the body or through body parts in general. So thank you all for joining me. That is the workshop for today. I will post links to my website as well as my collection in the chat. And yeah, I hope you all got a lot out of this. Here's also my contact information, just in case. I'm at Avitus B Carle everywhere, online, Instagram. I'm mostly on Blue Sky, but I'm all over. So if you want to contact me, feel free, follow, all the good things. And thank you all so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Avitus.
Thank you.
I'm going to paste some links in the chat real
Thank you.
quick. You can let Avitus what a great job she did today with our feedback survey. Spring classes have wrapped. I probably shouldn't have shared that link, but here we are. But we are working on planning for summer and fall, so please stay tuned. Best way to stay up to date with us is to subscribe to our newsletter. It's right there in those links. We also have upcoming events. Next week is our final Thursdays on the Stoop of the season. It'll be I think astrologically informed writing prompts. I think it's called Writing with the Stars with Marjorie Cottrell. So you can check that out on the events page. And of course, we have our creative co-working sessions on Wednesdays. And those are a nice time to get some work done with some peer accountability. It really works. I don't know why, but it does. Check it out. It's all free. We'd love to see you. And of course, if you want to support more programs like this one, go to bluestoop.org/donate. Link is in the chat. And as for summer class release dates, Jeremy, thank you for the question. I do not know, and I will keep you posted if you subscribe to the newsletter. So thank you again to everyone for being here, and thank you, Avitus, for this fabulous session. I will share the recording and all the resources via email, so just keep an eye out. Thank you again.
Thank you.